Welcome back. The Biden administration is about to dig into its first defense budget cycle. Most observers believe that budget will be smaller than the past decade or so. The Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments and the Ronald Reagan Institute say a major defense spending cut would have lasting impacts on the country's readiness and ability to carry out the national defense strategy. Roger Zakheim is director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library Foundation and Institute, former general counsel and deputy staff director of the House Armed Services Committee. Thomas Mahnken is president, chief executive officer of the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, former deputy assistant secretary of defense for policy planning. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for coming back on the program. Tom, I start with you. Do we even know yet exactly what the national defense strategy should look like or will look like in the new administration to have a sense of how the budget should hew to it?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you as always. Look, strictly the answer is no, but I would certainly expect large elements of continuity with the existing national defense strategy. The environment that we live in is one, characterized by competition with China and Russia. Those are looming challenges that the Biden administration is going to need to address, and I would guess will be front and center when they develop and release their national defense strategy.
Roger, the other factor here is your old stomping grounds of Capitol Hill. We have new leadership in the House Armed Services Committee, a new ranking Republican member, new leadership and new power players in the appropriations committees on both sides of the Hill. How important is that change, is that difference in worldview to what a budget will actually look like? One thing for the administration to ask for something, another thing for them to actually get it.
Yeah, and the new leadership in the Congress is an unknown how it will impact. But as you know, really drive what the president in the defense budget generally is what the president will get, with some marginal impact by the Congress, but more. However, as we looked at study and tool CSBA, is that Bernie Sanders is now going to chair the Budget Committee in the Senate, and he's proposed in the past a 10% cut to defense budget, something that people in the Democratic leadership in the Senate have actually embraced. So it could be quite impactful.
Tom, you looked specifically at that number. What do you see, and how easy or hard is it to predict where the 10% would come from to be able to think about what it means?
Well, look, when you get to something as large as a 10% cut, frankly, there's only a few places that you can go to generate savings of that magnitude, right? So what we saw in the exercises that we ran was modernization gets cut, and as much as the participants would like to speed up modernization, would like to preserve, to cut older systems and preserve newer ones, at that level you just can't do it. Personnel gets cut very, very heavily, and ground forces, ground presence gets cut very heavily as well. And these are all things that historically have been politically unpalatable.
Roger, I want to refer folks, rather than talking more about the nuts and bolts of this in the time that we have left, I want to refer folks to csbaonline.org, where they can go and read this for themselves. And explain to me the methodology here, because this is not the typical think tank, we send a bunch of research associates out to come up with a bunch of spreadsheets. You went about this dramatically differently, it seems to me, than most of these exercises happen in Washington. Describe that a bit for me, Roger.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Tom expand on the actual tool, but suffice to say, CSBA has come up with a very sophisticated budget tool, and we brought together, that is CSBA and the Reagan Institute, over 2 sessions, a large number of former policymakers, budget experts, industry people, to really wade in and see how could you actually do this, actually make the puts and takes to try to arrive at a 10% cut. Tom just gave you the impact and how difficult it was to do that. But this wasn't 1 or 2 or 3 people opining. They actually went in and tried to carry out the task at hand, and the results were quite devastating.
Tom, that was what struck me as I walked through this, that as I said, this is not, no disrespect to research assistants because they're great, but the firepower here was what impacted me, that made me think this is something that people should really pay attention to. Tell me about what Roger mentioned there about how you walk through this.
Yeah, no, thanks. We've developed over years a proprietary strategic choices tool, which is an instantiation of the FIDIP, and then a notional, FIDIP beyond that. So it allows participants, it allows users to make choices and actually be able to project the budgetary impact of those choices, not just in terms of acquisition, but also the associated manpower costs. And it does so in a very user-friendly way. So yeah, instead of just hand-waving, you actually get down to hard dollars and tough strategic choices.
We have about 30 seconds left, Tom, and I know this isn't a 30-second question. I apologize. But is there any scenario where a cut of that size isn't damaging, isn't impactful in a very negative way, in your view?
No. I mean, I think what we found was that a cut of that magnitude brings us to strategic insolvency, an inability to carry out the national defense strategy, and really narrows the scope of U.S. power to a dangerous extent.
Tom Mahnken, Roger Zakheim, thanks very much. I appreciate your time today.
Always a pleasure.